because that was not the smartest decision. But it's because I love this community. And it's funny because when I go to all these conferences in New York City or different places, they're like, Dallas, I didn't know social innovation and entrepreneurship happened in Dallas. And I'm like, that is my theory of change. I want people in, 4 or 5 years from now to be like, Dallas, there's so much cool stuff going on. Of course you live in Dallas. Because this is my hometown and I see all the great things that are happening. And so really the context for today's presentation, I want you to listen and hopefully it will kind of pique your interest. But I also want us to be really thoughtful about what could we be doing here in Dallas? What are some of the things that are the right things to transplant into Dallas that other communities are doing? It truly is the brave new world. I mean, this kind of stuff we're talking about is stuff that has only been around for a couple of decades and people are experimenting all over the place. So we're not necessarily behind. I think actually, if anything, we've got a really great ecosystem here in Dallas. And I love talking about all the great things that are going on in Dallas when I do travel. So as Nikki mentioned, I do have a blog. So as I go in my travels, I come across interesting concepts that I think people would be interested in knowing about. I also have to thank my clients. My clients ask me some of the best questions ever, and then I'm thinking, you know what, I should write about that answer. And so I oftentimes codify my answers in the blog, and so I write it every week. And it's called Social Trend Spotter. The point behind it is, if you think about it, this field is evolving so rapidly. And to be honest, I've been involved in the field now for almost 2 decades, and it's evolving more and more rapidly. It's even hard for me in my full-time job as someone who consults, teaches, does trending, to stay up with it. So I can only imagine how difficult it is for my clients to do that. So I write it so that people can really understand all the cool things that are going on, and hopefully, again, it piques their interest and maybe they can apply it to their own organizations. So I have that. I also have a social media platform, so as soon as I hear about something cool that's going on, I'll tweet it out to people as well. And so I try to curate interesting things. So that's kind of been my new adventure for this year. So I really appreciate the fact that I am partnering with the Social Enterprise Alliance on this, because I think the Social Enterprise Alliance has all sorts of good technology issues, clearly. Okay, well, I'm going to have to do this way then. No, it's frozen, that's why. Nope, it's just decided it was going to go to sleep on us. All right, so as I mentioned, I have gone to a number of different conferences. Spring is definitely the conference time period, and then the fall is the conference time period. So that's why I'm really hard to reach in February, in June, and in October, because that's when a lot of the conferences are. And so essentially, there are 2 that I really want to cover. Obviously, the Social Enterprise Alliance, because you're here. But last week, I was also in New York City at the Social Impact Exchange, and I think it had some really interesting trends as well. It's a little bit different. Social Enterprise Alliance is more for practitioners, social entrepreneurs, the people who are really at the grassroots level. And Social Impact Exchange is really more for philanthropists. So people like from the Kresge Foundation, or people who are leading researchers, MDRC, for example. And so they're really at the very leading edge of all the things that are happening. They're asking, is collective impact really working? Do we need to be doing place-based innovation? Those kind of things. So you'll see that I'll be going back and forth between the 2 conferences, talking about some of the different things we basically were panels or discussions, side room conversations, etc. So I wanted to share with you my quote from the Social Enterprise Alliance, or my blog, just so you can get a sense of what the energy was like. And truly, I'm going to be sharing information with you, but I'm also going to be showing you some videos so that you can really get a sense of the electricity that was going on at this particular conference. But I wanted to share with you just what I wrote, and this was actually the day it was ending. When we reflect on the 2013 Social Enterprise Alliance Summit in Minneapolis, 2 concepts will endure. First, the summit coined the term purpose economy as the defining element of the 21st century. As many of you know, there's been many people out there trying to define what the 21st century is going to be. Some people have called it the conceptual age. Some people are calling it now the purpose economy. We'll find out what it ends up landing at, but there are a lot of people who are talking about the purpose economy. And we'll talk about where the thrust for that comes from. Second, the summit launched the concept of leveraging policy change as a major thrust of the social enterprises movement's overall strategy. This sea change started with the inspiring Van Jones, who you'll hear from a little bit later, who said it best: "It is possible to turn the latest economic breakdown into a breakthrough." Aaron Hurst, founder of Taproot and author of a new book that is called The Purpose Economy, provided the spark that lit the fuse. His above-referenced quote, "Purpose will supplant information as the core of our economy," became the rallying cry for this transformation. So the 20th century was called the information economy, and so now they're thinking the 21st century could be called the purpose economy. To be honest, I like the fact that we're even having the conversation. So if it's the conceptual age, that's fine, but I also think the fact that it's really being talked about, I think, is what's really very exciting. So you can get a sense that there was a lot of electricity in the room. There were people there who were really trying to make sense of where we're going economically, and really trying to figure out how do we continue to shape what we're doing as a movement. I think what's unique, and I've spent a lot of time talking to my friends about this, is that we really are a mature movement now. And so with a mature movement, we need to start acting more mature. And so now best practices need to be codified. We need to start having discussions around ecosystem. We need to be transplanting ideas rather than inventing ideas. So there's a lot of discussion around what does a mature movement really look like. And so you'll see that I think this is the first kind of maturity that we potentially have. Just as a side note, if you need additional information on anything I'm talking about, because I'm only going to be able to give you a very superficial kind of viewpoint on anything, the star actually means that I have additional information on my blog on it. So that's what that means. So what I wanted to do is share with you some actual videos from the conference so you could get a sense of the energy that really existed. Unfortunately, we tried doing the videos through the actual presentation, but it didn't work very well. So I'm going to actually do them on my own. So you're just going to have to, hopefully you'll catch up on your notes as I pull up the videos. So this will give you a sense of how the energy of the Social Enterprise Alliance Conference.
The social enterprise economy is something that we really need to grow because it's...
We're going to try it one more time. It did just work.
The social enterprise economy is something that we really need to grow because it's the economy that's based on the common good. And we don't believe that you can just create an economy like that by accident. It needs to be created with some intentionality. So our goal is to build an economy that is built on purpose, and we concluded that there are 6 building blocks of the social enterprise economy, those being capital, markets, talent, knowledge, spirit, policy, and with communities and networks as the mortar that holds those all together.
Social enterprises face a lot of the same challenges, right? So how can we learn from each other? How can we communicate better and build a movement together?
The opportunity to speak with people from Minnesota, from Chicago, from Los Angeles, from San Francisco already is invaluable.
The Social Enterprise Summit is about doing social good with business in a different way.
The SEA Summit's about collective impact. It's about building and leveraging off of each other to create a stronger economy.
The Social Enterprise Alliance is about creating sustainable social change.
So you can get a sense from that video, but as I mentioned, the fuse that kind of lit the discussion around the purpose economy was really the discussion that Van Jones really kicked off. Anybody actually read his book, Rebuilding the Dream? So it's a great book. It's somewhat controversial, just so you know. I mean, he actually really pushes the envelope around what really happened with our economy and how we can't continue down the path that we have been down and assume it's going to work. And so I wanted just to share with you a little snippet of what he talked about. Some of you may remember he was domestic policy advisor for the Obama administration. Now he's actually a commentator for CNN. And he actually is just really provoking issues. When I talked to him, it's interesting because I was asking him about being somewhat controversial, and he goes, you know what, to get people to pay attention to you these days, you've got to be controversial. He said, I'm just provoking thinking. So I think he's got some really good points to make, and I wanted to share with you the quick little video they did on his discussion of what he thinks the new economy is going to look like.
How do we build an economy on purpose? Well, I would argue that your challenge is simply to build the business models that do the reverse of what just collapsed. And you are the people who get to create and to reinvent the economy based on ideas that are true. First false idea. We can have an economy based on consumption, not production. Second fallacy. We could build an economy based on credit and debt rather than smart savings and thrift like our grandparents. Third fallacy. The idea that we could have an economy based on ecological destruction rather than ecological restoration. I'm not a genius here. Just do the opposite of the dumb stuff that didn't work. To build an economy based on production, conservation, thrift, ecological restoration, and entrepreneurship. Only
That's a beer that's a social enterprise.
Are going to be able to meet the challenge.
So at our happy hour, we partook of Finnegan's. So I think you can see why that was really inspirational, to really hear from him about, his viewpoint, what's working, what's not working. And what I liked about what we did at this conference is we really did take a look at building blocks. So instead of talking about social enterprise in the abstract, we made it very concrete for people. And so we really talked about it in terms of, here are all the different pieces that we need to create this purpose economy. And so what I thought I would do today is share each of those different building blocks with you, and kind of my viewpoint on what I thought really stood out from both of these conferences within those. So you're going to get a little bit of a superficial understanding of capital, a little bit around policy, a little bit around talent. And if you want to go deeper, we certainly can through questions and through follow-up. But you can get a sense of kind of what we think it's going to take to really create an economy that is purposeful. So in order to do this, I wanted to share with you what each of these meant. So you're going to have to just bear with me one more time. This is the knowledge building block.
My block is knowledge. Knowledge is about sharing what you know, and hopefully through this conference, learning from others things you don't know. I think there's a great opportunity here at the conference to learn a lot of different new practices and best practices that then you can apply back in your home.
So that was Mark Spencer with Juma Ventures. He runs a very influential social enterprise in California. They actually just won, I'm really happy to say, the Social Innovation Exchange's big award, their business plan competition for early stage. Essentially, they've done such good work in California, and essentially their model is around working with teenagers and getting teenagers jobs, but not jobs in places that they wouldn't be interested in, because it's in sports facilities doing concessions. And so they take kids who are from the poorest neighborhoods and from the places that no one really wants to give jobs to, and goes out to those individuals, teach them skills, et cetera. And now what he's doing is he's going to be franchising that and going to Chicago, going to hopefully Dallas. I'm trying to convince him to come to Dallas and actually do this model with existing social enterprises, which is a really interesting point. It's an interesting point around best practice, because it's something that we've been really pushing lately. Because if you think about it, a lot of social entrepreneurs really took their individual best practices and basically translated them to the local context. So Teach for America brought bricks and mortar here. Reading Partners brought bricks and mortar here. And it may have been the absolute right decision. But what social entrepreneurs are saying about scaling is there are existing organizations within those communities. Could we instead transplant great ideas into existing nonprofits who already have support, who already have the infrastructure, and would not necessarily compete in the existing environment? So Joom is a really great example of that, and it's one of the reasons why they won the scaling competition, in my opinion, is because they're doing an atypical approach to scaling, which I hope becomes very typical. So it's a great kind of juxtaposition to best practices, because now we're a mature movement, so there really are best practices that are out there around information exchange, around best practices, around all the different things that we can do to make not only individual social entrepreneurs more successful, but social enterprises within organizations more successful, and then the network of social entrepreneurs much more successful. So there's a lot of discussion at all those different layers of how do we actually get all those layers to be more successful, but then also to work together. So there was a new word that was really kind of introduced, and it's been something that I've been working on the last year, which is ecosystems. So social entrepreneurial ecosystems. So for-profit entrepreneurs have been talking about this, Nancy, for how long? 10 years, 15, something like that. So now we're borrowing it from the for-profit folks and saying we need ecosystems too, because we know how to start social enterprises. We've started a lot. But how do we know how to get them to thrive? And the only way we know businesses thrive is through ecosystems and the networking and all the different things that go into it. So really one of the first things that we really spent a lot of time talking about is what are some of the different best practices. One of the things that I think was a resounding theme, in fact, I think my ears were going to burn if I heard this word one more time, was the word impact. We kept hearing impact, impact, impact. In fact, we were in New York City, so we jokingly said impact is the word, like grease is the word, impact is the word. We kept hearing it all the time. And so I actually wrote my blog post today on that because, interestingly enough, 5 years ago, what word did I hear a lot? Innovation, innovation, innovation. And so what does that mean? Is innovation out and impact in? So what I talked about in the blog is I don't really think it's an either or. I'm a big both and person. I think that we don't live in an either or world, it's both and. But what I think you see is a maturing of the movement. So clearly we still need innovation, but we don't need as much innovation as we did before. Why is that? Because we're more mature. We now know how things actually work. So after school programs, do we need to innovate around after school programs? Probably not. I mean, we've got best practices around what after school programs do and what they do best. There's lots of good research out there. So we've had 2 decades of really great federal research around lots of really intensive things. On the flip side of that, also in the education space, high schools. We don't know what works in high schools. I mean, the Gates Foundation is scratching their head over it right now, but that means there needs to be some innovation. So what we're doing is actually moving from pure innovation, which to me innovation is a continuum, from pure innovation to adaptive innovation. Oftentimes also people will call this lean startup. I do have a blog on lean startup if you're interested. But basically what this means is take the existing best practices that you know work. See if there's anything in the community or in the country that may be doing what you're doing. Go learn about it and then adapt it to your current environment rather than starting from scratch. So we as innovators are saying we can even do innovation better. We don't need to be doing pure innovation for the sake of pure innovation, that a lot of the really good ideas have at least been started. So the goal of real innovation is to then move to impact, which means there has to be an evidence base, which means that we have to be doing impact evaluations of stuff. But if impact evaluations have already been done, we truly know what impact is. So impact was the word. A lot of people were talking about impact. It's easier said than done. It takes a lot of time and effort to really be able to do impact. But truly, one of the things I've been saying lately is impact is the new bottom line for the social sector. So part of our job as entrepreneurs now will be to getting our community ready for that. And there are some really positive things that are happening in this community specifically on that. I think Communities Foundation has been taking a real leadership role and not just saying, give me impact, but they're showing people how to do impact, how to do impact evaluations. And when I say impact, I mean impact in the broadest sense. It's not just showing what you do works. It's also showing what you do that doesn't work and improving upon it. and doing that continuous quality improvement that's so important. So impact in the broadest word. So I ended my blog with this quote, and it's kind of lit up the Twitter sphere a little bit. Social genius is 20% innovation and 80% impact. So I took the Edison quote and adapted it. Interestingly enough, people are arguing with me on the percentages, which I love. It's the whole reason why you do it, right? But I like the fact that we're talking about it. I like the fact that people are saying, woe on the impact and bring on impact. Woe on the innovation, bring on impact. I think that's what we need to be saying right now. We're mature now, and so we know a lot of what works, and when we don't, then we can innovate. So that was one big discussion that happened, particularly at the Social Impact Exchange. I mentioned ecosystem. This is something I've been spending a lot of my time with. There are now a couple of existing ecosystem providers here in the United States. Some of you may know that we're trailing a number of other developed countries when it comes to social enterprise and entrepreneurship, but we're very quickly actually catching up. In fact, there are some people who are saying with social impact bonds in particular, we may actually surpass others, which we'll get to what social impact bonds are in a couple seconds. So we are really catching up very, very quickly. But one of the things, as I mentioned, we know about individuals, we know about organizations, but what about the ecosystem? And so I worked with some of my friends who also have developed ecosystems. I'm working on an ecosystem in Cincinnati that you heard about, Flywheel. And there are others in Rhode Island that's actually an SVP, and then there's one in Canada. And so we basically put together what we think our hypothesis is of what is a good social enterprise ecosystem. And I won't go over this in a ton of detail because, to be honest, if you look at these look very similar to what we talked about at the Social Enterprise Alliance. So these are the blocks that we're going to be talking about very soon. So an engaged community, impact, which we just discussed, access to capital, which we will discuss, market opportunities, and business acumen. And so we've talked a little bit about best practices, but definitely the business acumen part is really important. So questions on knowledge, information, and best practices. Okay. So let's move on to marketplace. So marketplace is one that's really interesting because it is one that I think we have to be really innovative with because there isn't a lot going on with marketplace. But there are some really interesting things for us to follow.
Hi, my name is Amber and my block is Markets. To me, it's about identifying opportunities for new consumers, new business models that you can actually apply to affect change socially or environmentally, and so just really looking for new ways to do impactful work. And so I think that's one of the reasons why this is one of the blocks is, you know, it's a big part of using business models for good, and that's what social enterprise is all about.
So let's talk about marketplaces just real quickly. One of the things that has always struck me with my clients that do social enterprise is that they always really try hard to get into the market, but it seems like there are barriers. Number one, when you want to buy from a social enterprise, you have to explain the whole social enterprise part to people. So what if we didn't have to explain that? What if consumers really understood what social enterprise was the same way they understand fair trade and organic? That's not impossible. Interestingly enough, as Nikki mentioned, I teach undergraduates at UNT, and practically everybody there gets it, and as soon as you say it to them, they're like, okay, I'll buy from that. That's exactly what I want to do. So you already have a generation who already gets it, and it's just part of their ethos, and they're buyers. So it's not too hard to think about, could we actually create a marketplace where people are asking those kind of questions? So before they actually go buy something, they have a choice of using a caterer, for example, and say, do I use Panera Bread or do I use Cafe Momentum? Same price. Interestingly enough, we recently did some research in Cincinnati, which we're going to be releasing, about when do people make buying decisions. And essentially what it said is that social enterprises they can't kind of rest on their social laurels. You probably are going to say a little bit about this a little bit later. It has to be the same quality, and it can't be that much more expensive. And then people will go with the social enterprise. That's not different than we felt with the green movement or organic or even fair trade. So interestingly enough, what if we hit that paradigm where 10 years from now people understood what a social enterprise was? What if we were able to aggregate all the social enterprises so maybe there was a website that you could go to Maybe you want to send a gift for a wedding, or maybe you want to get a caterer, and all those social enterprises were listed together. And that's actually what's actually happening. So you can see there's an app already that's called Social Impact. I encourage you to download it today. And you can actually, wherever you are, find social enterprises. So when I go to communities, the first thing I do is pull up this app and say, is there a restaurant? Is there a dry cleaner? Is there, whatever it is that I need, is there this? And so people need to be added to this. So we definitely need to add the social enterprises here locally. But that's one of the possible innovative things that could be done. Another thing that could be innovative that is done is just a website. So Rhode Island basically has a website of all the social enterprises. It's called Buy with Heart. So they're thinking about taking that national. SEA is thinking about doing that. So to me, you have to still address the supply and demand. We can provide the supply, we can do an app, we can do a website, but we have to create the demand part too. And you probably have seen there's lots of campaigns around buying organic or buying small business, buying local. Could we have a buy social enterprise movement so that people really understand what it means and they understand the value proposition of that? On the flip side of that, so that's the marketplace. To me, the other thing that would be really fascinating, and this is something that's really piqued my interest lately, is purchasing. So if you'll remember 20 years ago, there was a real movement around really generating wealth among minorities as well as women. Now, very recently, it's around veterans. And so what happened is governments actually put together regulations actually supporting minority women-owned businesses and giving them some level of preference, whether it was additional points, whether it was a percentage of what they were actually supposed to be buying from. And that really has shot up the number of women-owned businesses, the number of minority-owned businesses. So from my perspective, social enterprises could be in that category too. Oftentimes, we are actually serving disadvantaged populations. And so one of the things we're thinking about is, could we work with our counterparts at NAACP, NOW, et cetera, and say, we'd like to be added to that preferential treatment. And as I said, veterans are being added lately. So it does seem like that potential purchasing could actually be there. Interestingly enough, in Canada, this already exists. Actually, in the last Olympics, 15% of the contracts had to go to social enterprises. So there's lots of examples of this already happening from the government. And so we've already had some initial conversations with some cities that have been very interested. Because if you think about it, what does the city get out of it by doing that? If they get a caterer, they get a provider, that money that's the profit just recycles back into the community for social services. So it could actually end up saving them money in the long run versus giving it to a for-profit entrepreneur who puts it in their pocket, but maybe goes and spends it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But it does really recycle in the community, so there could be a real economic benefit to the city or the county or the state that potentially does this. So I think there's a lot of good disruptive innovation that can happen in Marketplace, and this is definitely one to watch. Any questions about Marketplace? Okay.
I got a quick question.
Yeah.
With the whole green movement and getting people involved in that, it became really saturated and greenwashed. Yeah. Is there any plans on, like, with social enterprise, how to avoid that? How to differentiate the true social enterprises from the people that are riding the coattails?
So that's always like the next question for people is, how do we prevent abuse? And I think we've got to deal with that. And one of the things that has held us back, and as I've talked with policymakers about this, if I talk to the elite around this, is our definition. Our definition, we try to make it really broad to be inclusive and have a big tent because that's who we are. But when it comes down to purchasing, there has to be an either or. And you have to make sure you're excluding the people who are not truly social enterprises. The difference with minority and women-owned business is the person's in charge and you can tell they're a minority or a woman. Social is a little bit different. I mean, to be honest, sometimes you use the Supreme Court test of you either are or you're not. It's in the eye of the beholder, basically. We can't do that with the government. It has to be an either or. So we are wrestling with that. In fact, 2 years ago, they came up with a certification, but it got abandoned for a number of reasons. The UK thought about doing a certification. They abandoned it as well because, again, that either-or philosophy. So I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen with that, but to be honest, In order for marketplace to move, we have to figure that out. So I'm kind of hoping, that's why I said disruptive innovation, because my guess is there'll be a couple of cities who figure this out. And then we're going to, just like social impact bonds, we're going to see success, failure, and then we'll have best practice around the definition. So hopefully we'll figure that out so that marketplace can actually really, build that kind of traction. But stay tuned on that, because I do think that's the precursor of this actually being successful. Okay, so the next one that we're going to actually talk about is one of my favorites, and that is public policy. So some of you may know I was actually a lobbyist in a former life. So policy is through my blood.
My block is policy, and I think policy is so important to build an economy on purpose because it helps us connect the dot among all of our stakeholders, and public policy officials help us find innovative ways to operate social enterprises. If we can get them involved and particularly get their commitment around funding or any other ways in which they can help support the field, that's going to do a lot for the economy.
So a little bit of background, that's Ann Wonderly. She actually owns a social enterprise called Pine Street Inn in Boston. And they do amazing things for women who are in need. And so she's was also served on the board with me for a while. So if you ever need salad dressing or anything like that, they make really great salad dressing and all sorts of other things. So policy, let me give you some context around policy. So policy is a tough thing for people to kind of wrap their head around. It seems really, really like, oh, I don't know if I really want to call my legislator. I don't know if I really want to do that. But the reality is that everybody's been using policy as a lever for social change, whether it's the anti-smoking initiative. I mean, we just had some big policy changes this last week that you may be for or against, so I won't even mention. But policy really does drive us as an environment. And so for us to not be looking at policy really misses the whole point of transformational change. So we have to be looking at it, and we have to be looking at it at the broadest level. So we did get some policy success, and I think that early success has really helped spur future success. I'll give you just a little bit of background. When the Obama administration came in, they started the Office of Social Innovation, so that actually really did get the government talking about social innovation, what that meant. It should have been called the Office of Social Impact, in my opinion, but social innovation nonetheless. And then they had the Social Innovation Fund. Also should have been Social Impact Fund. But innovation's much more sexy, so that's what they use. So anyway, they got those going. And so they've been doing all this great work. So in addition to having a Social Innovation Fund, the Department of Education has had I3. Now there's all these really great energy projects. NASA's been doing competitions like the X Prize. So they're really getting to understand what impact and innovation is and what it can do in the government. So it's really transformed a number of people's mind around, can government be entrepreneurial? In fact, there was just a recent kind of release of a report that Harvard put out where they interviewed a bunch of people across the country, including myself, and they actually talked about, can government be innovative? And so they asked that question first, and then they actually went to government to try to figure out what they were doing that was innovative. And you can really tell that the last 5 years has made this huge difference as far as government really feeling like they can play a role at being innovative. And if you get a chance, I would really encourage you to read it, because it really gives you a sense of what is possible. Unfortunately, Dallas was not mentioned in the report, so that's something I'm working on right now. I've got a meeting with my city council member next week, and we're going to talk about it. But here are the past successes, and that past success have reaped so many rewards and so many ripple effects. So today, there's a couple of things that we're looking at, and there's many things that are happening, but these are the ones that are specific to social enterprise. So first and foremost, we've never had a social enterprise bill. Now, there's been some trickle effect. So some of the SIF money went to social enterprises. The Office of Social Innovation has been doing some things around social enterprise. But truly, there hasn't been something centered around social enterprise, which is really surprising given that social enterprise, at the root of it, is business. And what do businesses do? They hire people. What do you need to do in a bad economy? Hire people. You know, so business really could be a real engine around the economy. So interestingly enough, it's been something that we've been talking about for a while and thinking about taking on for policy. So I'm happy to say about a month ago, there is finally a bill called the Seed Bill that Representative Cicilline from Rhode Island has introduced, and it was to kind of big fanfare. I mean, it was big in our movement, I guess, that we got a federal bill. And it's called SEED, and it's Social Enterprise, Ecosystem, and Economic Development. And really, the bill is pretty long, but basically there are two things that the bill does. One is it changes the definition that SBA uses related to business. Can anybody tell me why that's important? I know you can tell me why that's important. Anybody else? Why is it important? Capability of raising funds. So right now, nonprofits who have businesses are locked out of going after SBA loans. Why is that? Legacy. Nonprofits didn't have businesses before. So that's just how we've always done it. So we're always going to do it that way. So the bill basically turns back the clock on that and says anybody who has a business, it doesn't matter what your tax designation is, can go after the money. Now you still have to have a good business plan, you still have to have a good financial model, you have to compete at the same level, but it doesn't lock you out of the ability to get those SBA loans, which can be really important for any new business, whether it's operated by a for-profit or a nonprofit. The other thing it does is it starts a commission to look at social enterprise, and it looks at a number of different things. Research around how many social enterprises there are. Believe it or not, we have no idea how many social enterprises there are in the country. So it's going to look at that. It's going to look at the definitional issue, which was brought up earlier. So, because again, as a movement, we can't move forward until the definitional thing gets taken care of. So that just gives you a little bit of a taste of what SEED is doing. I'm happy to say, after the work of many people, there's already been 12 co-sponsors. I think there may be 13 after a meeting yesterday with a California congressperson, but there is not one from Texas. So that's definitely something for us to think about, right? Interestingly enough, people have been tipping really quickly because who wouldn't want this? Jobs, social enterprise. I mean, this is an R and a D issue. It's not something that people really are quibbling about. So I think we could very easily get a lot of people from Texas supporting. At a state and local level, we've got task forces that are working on social enterprise and economic development. We've also got proclamations, which Nikki was so great to get one for the state of Texas. You can see that up there. I think you can probably see the state seal and Rick Perry's signature. Really just raising awareness. You're probably asking me, why do we need to raise awareness about social enterprise? Well, I'll tell you, we had a lot of people do these proclamations, and I had 4 people at the conference say, I'm so glad, Suzanne, you got me to do a proclamation, because after the governor signed the proclamation, their first question was, what is social enterprise? So now we have 4 governors who didn't know what social enterprise was, and now they do. So those proclamations, while they can seem like they're not very important, can be very important in starting a very substantive conversation. The Illinois Task Force, I would encourage you to check that out. They're doing some amazing things in Illinois. I can't tell you enough about how much I'm excited about watching Illinois. Okay, any questions on policy? All right, so the next one we're going to do is capital. Show me the money, right? We all need the money.
My block is capital, and capital is money. And during these sessions, we're going to learn sources of funds to help finance the startup of social enterprises, how to keep them going, how to keep those dollars there, and eventually grow. And new sources of capital are coming online all the time. And so that's what we're going to focus on. The existing ones, the common ones we all know about, but the brand new styles and ways to attract capital to your social enterprise.
Right. So capital was also a big topic of conversation at the conference. Access to capital, all the different elements that go into, I know how to actually really do this where you don't have to do it, but this, for some reason, PowerPoint doesn't allow you to do that. So that's why I have to do that every time. Okay, so access to capital is an ongoing challenge for nonprofits, but even for for-profit businesses, because about 20 to 30%, again, because we don't have a census, it's a rough estimate, are for-profits, like myself. like Vin's company. And so it's difficult because your balance sheet may not look the same as other people's balance sheets, even when you're a for-profit, because you're giving back so many pro bono hours, et cetera. So we really have to be paying attention to access to capital on so many different levels. But interestingly enough, there was lots of discussions around different sources of funding. I think one of the things I'm most excited about right now is new market tax credits. But there's also lots of other things that I think that are out there that we could be taking advantage of, particularly in the last tax code and the last congressional session. And so there are some interesting things, but they don't trickle down to the social enterprise at the basic level. So I do think that the change in SBA, if the seed bill was passed, would be revolutionary as far as giving us access to capital. There are also two other things that I just wanted to mention, and again, if you want to learn more about them, you can read my blog about them, is impact investing and social impact bonds. So impact investing is the broader category around all the things that are happening related to capital in the social space. So it includes social venture funds, which there's more and more of those going on. It also includes social impact bonds. It includes debt. It includes all those things. But there's lots of discussion and lots of very purposeful and thoughtful kind of research around where could impact investing really make a difference in the social sector. And you have some really big players, you know, JP Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley. I mean, you have all these different people who are paying attention to this, but also very small banks, credit unions, CDFIs, all these people who are paying attention to the access to capital issue and seeing could they actually invest in social ventures. In fact, there's actually a foundation very recently, Heron, that only is going to do impact investing. They're not going to give out grants anymore. They're going to do MRIs and PRIs, which is mission-related investments and program-related investments. And so there's a lot of real interest in this area. If you think about it, only 2% of our income goes to charitable contributions. How do we unlock that other 98%? And impact investing is one of the ways of looking at that. Social impact bonds, pay for success, those are used interchangeably. Again, pay for success is a little sexier, so they use that at a federal level. Same thing, social impact bonds. Essentially, it's just how do we kind of shortchange the future in some ways and bring in money so that we can actually be successful. So let me give you a hard example of that. So let's say I'm in New York City. And I have an overcrowded prison population. That's a big problem for me as a government because that means I have to let people out who haven't served their term. So if I instead say to somebody who has a proven program, so the impact part is crucial here. It cannot be an experimental program. It's got to be a proven program. If they can reduce recidivism rates by 50%, what happens if I fully invest in making sure every prisoner who comes out of prison goes through that program? I'm going to decrease the amount of beds I need because half as many people are going to be coming back to me. So that saves me money. Well, who likes money? Investors. So if the investors now invest in that nonprofit to reduce the recidivism rate and the government backs it, when those people do not go back into prison, the government saves money, the investors make money. Simple, right? Still being researched to see if we can actually make this work, make the finances work, ensure that we have the proven practices. And it's one of the reasons why it has to be something where we know for sure that you're going to get the outcome, because otherwise it's too risky. Although very recently, I'm really excited about the state of Utah is actually looking at early childhood education. So they're doing a more long-term investment. Most governments want that short-term, we know someone's going back to prison or not. But interestingly enough, there's been some more experimental ones that have been done in education, which we're definitely watching. So there's lots of disruptive innovation going on in this area, which is why we may eclipse our counterparts in developing countries around social impact bonds. There's also some bills right now going on in Congress around social impact bonds. I'm sorry, pay for success when you talk about the federal government. And so there's definitely going to be some cool stuff in this area. I know there's some local movements around social impact bonds, so stay tuned on that one. That one's a very interesting one to watch. Any questions on capital? All right, moving on. So the next one I wanted to make sure we connected about is talent. And this is one that as a professor, I love talking about talent.
Talent's about the people, and really it comes down to anything that is worth doing.
I'm going to try that one again, see if the miracle works.
talent's about the people, and really it comes down to anything that is worth doing. You have to get the right kind of people involved, and I think the social enterprise movement is something that has really captured the hearts of the kind of people that you want involved in the movement. At least in our city, we're seeing in Nashville that so many of the young people coming out of college today have the spirit about them, which is also on this block, but they also have the talent, and they really take that talent and use it for good purpose.
So talent is also a really important thing. For us to be successful as a movement, we've got to have the right people in the right place at the right time. And it's not just about people. Those people have to be talented. They have to have the talent to do something. So we have people graduating from college. How do we get them ready to not only run a program, a socially oriented program that has impact, but also run it like a business? They've got to have both. They can't have one or the other. How do we get people who are retiring and maybe want a second career, so baby boomers, for example, who've been in business their entire career, how do we get those people who now want to give back to understand enough about the nonprofit sector that they get the culture and they get how to actually create impact? So how do we actually create curriculums that actually get the millennials ready? How do we actually create transition opportunities, internships, et cetera, for baby boomers so they can effectively use their talent in the nonprofit space and the social sector? Those are all things that we were talking about. Now that we know the best practices and the knowledge, it's really just about making sure they go to the classes, they go to the different certifications, et cetera, to make sure they're fully equipped to help out the social sector organization as soon as possible, and that the learning curve is as little as possible. So fortunately, there's lots of good organizations who are doing this. Taproot Foundation is one example when it comes to people who are in the space. And another good example is A Billion Plus Change, which is actually trying to get pro bono talent, because obviously you want full-time talent, but sometimes that pro bono talent can be incredibly helpful. And maybe you want an advertising campaign, and you can't get an advertising campaign from an employee. You need to get that from an actual agency. So pro bono talent can be incredibly helpful in the right place at the right time. So A Billion Plus Change is trying to sign up people all across the country to sign up saying, I'm a for-profit company and I'm willing to give back. It's as simple as that. And then on the millennial side, you know, I don't even know, Nancy, there must be 125 of us that are teaching social entrepreneurship across the country. My understanding is that every year it grows by about 20%. More and more college campuses are teaching social entrepreneurship. My class, I had a wait list for it. They were sitting on the floor the first day. Your class was probably the same, Bob, and your class. So there are more and more millennials who want to be in these classes, you know, and will beg, borrow, steal to be in the classes. And so universities are paying attention to this. Even in MBA schools, when I went to MBA school at Duke, there were 3 schools who taught social entrepreneurship and had a concentration. Now there are 30. So, and that's in 5 years, 7 years. So we're going to have equipped people. It's just a matter of, are we going to put them in the right place at the right time? Are we going to understand their talent, be able to utilize their talent, give them the latitude that they want to be entrepreneurs before they're an entrepreneur? And is the space really ready for that? So we discussed all of those different things. Any questions about talent? All right. So, yeah, go for it. So one of the things we really need to do is make sure we dispel myths. So I think one of the myths I try to dispel for my students is you can't make money in a nonprofit. I mean, I worked for many nonprofits before I went to business school, and I was making pretty good money. And in fact, when I was married, I actually made more money than my husband, who was older than me and had an MBA at Southwestern Bell, because I was doing really important work for a national association. So I think it depends on the national nonprofit or the nonprofits you're working with. And I think it's also about having that conversation about, are you really wanting to hire talent or are you wanting to hire people? So I think that's a conversation that as the sector we have to have. But I see some leading indicators of national nonprofits, even community-based nonprofits hiring. They also are recognizing that in order to get and compete, they're competing with for-profits, for people. But specific to your question on overhead, because that is a sore subject for me in general, is, and this is why I love Dan Pallotta. Because Dan Pallotta, if you guys haven't seen his video, I think everybody has, but if you haven't, you need to. Dan Pallotta has really been trying to fight this myth of overhead. The reality is it creates a starvation cycle, where basically the organization starves itself of the real resources and the fuel that it needs to be a good organization, a great organization. I'll give you the example I give my students. Would you rather have people in your community go to a soup kitchen that's open from 4 to 7 that serves soup out of a can but has very low overhead? Or would you rather go to a soup kitchen that is open 24/7, serves very nutritious soup, also provides those people with a brochure, maybe a little bit of intensive counseling if they're bipolar or have some incident that they're going through right then, but it's a really good place that they can go to any day they need to when they need help? It's going to have more overhead. Which would you prefer? So what we're doing is we're funding a myth around poor services usually. I'm not saying overhead is something that we shouldn't be controlling and we should be thinking about as a benchmark. But you don't see for-profits worrying about their overhead as long as they're making a bottom line. And so, again, I'm going to go way too far on that issue. But to be honest, overhead is one of those things that because business people want a metric, they think overhead is a good metric, and it is, but they take it to an extreme. So the good news is there's now a website called The Overhead Myth, where all 3 organizations that rate charities, Charity Navigator, Better Business Bureau, and I'm missing GuideStar, have all joined together because they're the ones that have perpetuated this myth unintentionally. It's an unintended consequence of a good idea that now we realize is not a good idea anymore. Because I'm all about metrics, not the right metric. So people are going on, signing up, and again, this is one thing here in Dallas that we could really make a difference in by going out and saying overhead is not the only metric. You've got to be paying attention. Research and evaluation is overhead. Having a good CEO, having a marketing person is overhead. And so you starve organizations from really important things that they should be doing to measure themselves, to market themselves, to tell their story, to hire the best talent. And you end up with soup kitchens that are open from 4 to 7, providing soup out of a can. So it's a choice we have to make as a society. And I'm positive in 5 years from now, people won't be spending time thinking about overhead. It's going to be something that'll be a distant memory, hopefully. Yes, ma'am. It is true.
We interviewed Dan Pallotta, he's an incredible guy. And, I'm with him. As a nonprofit, having run a nonprofit, having to account for overhead. It's like, wait a minute, we're not supposed to pay people or have computers that work. So
I totally agree.
This is up to us.
It is.
To educate our funders.
Right.
And say, we can't survive.
And I will just say, as a side note, United Way just abolished their viewpoint on that just a couple of days ago. And so there is traction in that area, but it's up to all of us as members of boards, as the community. When you have someone who says to you, this overhead is too much, I can't believe it's 15, 20%, you need to say to them, here's why it's 15 to 20%. They're doing evaluation, they're actually making the soup, they're open 24/7, so that costs more electricity. All of that's overhead. What do you want? What do we want as a society? So again, I'm not saying I want overhead to be 40%, but it is being the only indicator. It doesn't make sense for it to be the only indicator. I appreciate that question, though. So go to overheadmyth.com or org, whichever it is, and sign the pledge. So people really will stand up to fight the myth of overhead. All right, so the last but not least is one that I'm excited about because it's one I haven't ever seen at a conference before. So I want you to see it for yourself.
My block is about spirit. I think spirit's about taking care of yourself while you're busy taking care of other people in your business. The enthusiasm and spirit that everyone brings is essential to growing this social enterprise economy. You really can't have a business with a true mission without that sense of spirit. And I think all the people here get that. And part of building this industry is getting that out and helping everyone else understand what's behind what we're all trying to accomplish.
So we do spend a lot of time taking care of other people and not taking care of ourselves in this sector. And so I thought the fact that they even talked about it was really brilliant. I think the other thing that we talked about is, how do we make sure we're doing all the right things? So social entrepreneurs have this dual issue, this dual dilemma of profit or mission. And I can't tell you how many times I walk into an office of social enterprise and that is their big issue. Do I invest to potentially make more profit, or do I put the mission first? And that's definitely something that confounds a lot of social enterprises and social entrepreneurs. Innovation or impact. Do I go with what I know and make sure I'm having as much impact as possible, or do I innovate? And when do I stop my innovation? There's oftentimes people who are social entrepreneurs that are very good at innovation, and when their organization starts to age and they need to mature, they can't stop innovating. And so they may need to move out of the organization, and they have to have a tough conversation with themselves about impact is really what I need to do. I need to stabilize this organization. Can I actually do that? I know in Dallas Social Venture Partners, that's something we spend a lot of our time with. Our organization's talking about is innovation time, or is it needing to wane a little bit? Are you wanting 80-20, 50-50? I mean, you've got to figure that out. So in that sense, you've got to really ask the tough questions of yourself. So you got to take care of yourself, but you also have to ask the really tough questions. And there was a lady who actually runs a Goodwill in California that did a fabulous job of doing this. And she actually asked us to ask a couple of questions of ourselves, really to see ourselves as transformational leaders, to not just be satisfied with leadership, but only do it if you're going to transform something. That it can't be about the ego, it can't be about anything else. And so that really gets to servant leadership. To me, I walked away with, we really have to have that level of servant leadership. And the two questions that she asked me, or all of us actually, to answer is, am I part of the solution or am I part of the problem? So sometimes the person who starts an organization shouldn't be the one that continues it, and they may be part of the problem. And so really having those hard questions, and particularly as entrepreneurs, you have to really figure that out. That's one thing I know about myself. I like starting things. I don't like continuing things. So I hire people who like to continue things. So I know that about myself. But you got to be able to have those hard conversations with yourself. And when do I need to admit failure? Earlier is better, because then it's really not a failure, right? So all those hard questions. Where is the best use of my time and energy? Time management, energy management, all of those things. Oftentimes in the social sector, we say yes way too much because we're really nice people. We don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But where is the best time and energy? So she really challenged all of us to spend time on the strategic things and not just the everyday things. In order to be a transformational leader, you have to spend time on the transformational, strategic things rather than just the everyday things, and that includes emails and iPhones and all those kind of things. So I think they did a really great job of really reminding people why we do what we do, actually speaking to our spirits, but also giving us some real tools of asking ourselves hard questions and saying, are you really managing your time and energy the way you need to in order to make the transformational change we need in this space? The other thing I think is important, and just to put a plug in for the chapter, one of the things I feel very affirmed by when I go to these conferences is I'm around other social entrepreneurs, and we get to talk about all the things we deal with. And so I think if you're interested in kind of being around other colleagues and being able to talk about the issues that you deal with as entrepreneurs, the chapter is a really great example of that. And you can see there's chapters all over the country, 2 new ones, one in Cincinnati and one in Seattle that's going to be starting. So they're all over the place. And so I encourage you to pull together and join chapters when you can. And certainly the one here is very robust and does lots of great things. So that's another way to affirm your spirit. All right, so that is it for me. You've got all the different parts of the cube. Saw the little cube that everybody had. Any final questions? Any final thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
More than anything else, those of us who were not able to represent, what did we really miss? One thing.
I think that it's the recognition that we are no longer in our infancy. It is that we have evolved and that we're in maturity, and we need to really act like a mature movement, take on policy, take on talent, all those things that are structural, that if we don't take on those structural issues, the movement will die. or it won't go to the transformational space that we really want it to go to, the exponential level. And so I think that's probably what this conference did, is it really talked about how do we figure out capital, how do we figure out talent, how do we figure out all these things that really are going to accelerate the movement significantly. And then I'd say coupled with that, I would say ecosystems, that we really are one big ecosystem. Everything connects with another. And so how do we really work together more? So I would say the first from Social Enterprise Alliance, the second from Social Impact Exchange, that we're all connected. Collaboration was a big word there. Note not collective impact, but collaboration, a precursor to collective impact. And so something to think about. I think those are probably the two. I did write blogs on all of them, so that would go into much more detail, but those would be probably, to me, the highlights of those two conferences. Anything else? All right. I'm going to turn it back over to our MC.